Henry somehow gets classified as a horror film, but it really is a film, a character study that's about horrific deeds.
People were very interested in real things. What we wanted to do, although we did it fictively, was show a real week in the life of a sociopath, unadorned by social commentary.
It was actually very difficult, but I mean, you know, you got to leave. Trust me, on this job, you leave the work at work. Go home, live your life, because you cannot bring this shit home with you.
When I came back to Chicago from, you know, being a child of the 60s, a product of the 60s, we weren't, it was a very different time. And we weren't interested in jobs and careers. We were interested in other things. So I'd had years of adventure out on the road in America and living in various places, and came back to Chicago knowing that, okay, I'm going to now make a move in my life and become a filmmaker, which is what I'd wanted to do. And so, but I needed a job, and I wound up working for my cousins in their bar in Homewood. And I was an afternoon, kind of slow, and this guy walked in who was, as I remember it, was half drunk. And I was talking to him, and he said, oh, I'm working for these, you know, about that I was a filmmaker, or an aspiring filmmaker. And he said, oh, I'm working for these guys out here in Tinley Park, I believe it was, or Orland Park. And they have this company, MPI, it was called Maljack at the time. And a number of years later, I went to see them. Waleed was a dreamer and a visionary, and he said, John, one day we're going to make a movie, you and I. We'll make a movie someday. And I go, yeah, that'd be great.
These were but a few of America's dealers in death. Their names were household words during the 30s and 40s.
There is a gentleman in Henry, the big fat guy that gets the TV whacked over his head, Ray Atherton, who was one of the leading experts on public domain in the cinema. And MPI wanted us to do these projects about Chicago gangsters. So Ray wrote these two shows called Dealers in Death, and also located all this public domain footage of gangsters.
Why did the criminals of the 20th century warrant the attention they received? Probably it's that the headline-hungry news media of the day found it highly profitable to romanticize the violent careers of these 20th century gangsters.
Did okay, made a little money. So based on the success of those shows, we were going to do a second series of documentaries based on wrestling.
Gomez finally strikes where it'll do the most good on Bruiser's shiny head.
So I had a meeting with Waleed, and I drove out to the south suburbs. I was living in the city to talk about these projects. And I guess when Waleed and Malik had contacted the person who owned the footage, whatever price he'd quoted them, once he found out they were actually interested and had money, he changed the deal. Oh, I didn't say this much money. I said this much money. Well, those guys just don't like to be dealt with in that manner. So I went into the meeting. I was sitting in Waleed's office, and Waleed said, you know, John, we talked to this guy, and the guy is like trying to shake us down on this deal. We're not going to make a deal with him. But I tell you what, remember that dream we had to make a motion picture? I want to make a horror film.
Susie!
And so it was one of those days where, you know, your dream comes true, something you've been wanting to do for years and years. I went in there expecting to make some more documentaries on wrestling, and walked out of his office with a $100,000 budget to make a horror film. I had no idea of what. The early days of video, there were tons of low-budget horror films that saw very little theatrical distribution. They weren't known by the public, but they rented very well because they were unknown, and people loved to rent these, you know, sort of low-budget horror films. So I was walking down the hall in their old building, where they no longer are. There was an office that was occupied by a guy named Gus Kavouris. And Gus was always a collector and lover of the strange, the arcane, the twisted, the weird. And Gus had an office just piled with video cassettes and of all the strange stuff that he would gather. And I walked into Gus's office and I just said, I was kind of in shock. I said, Gus, Wally just offered me $100,000 to make a horror film, but I've got no idea what, He said, here, I want you to watch this. And he grabbed a video cassette, popped it in. And it was the television show 2020. And they had done a feature on Henry Lee Lucas. And it was about a 20-minute piece. And I sat there for 20 minutes and watched it, and I just went, this is it.
Open your eyes, Otis. Look at the world. It's either you or them. You know what I mean.
So at that point, Steve Jones came into the picture. Steve was much more connected into the production community in Chicago than I was at that point.
He basically came in and sat on my couch, I got $100,000, I want to make this Henry Lee Lucas story. And he had a little metal box with index cards in it. Like when you go to script writing class, they have you fill out index cards. And I started filing through the index cards, and I said, well, I think you need a writer first and foremost. And I had done some work with a place called the Organic Theater in Chicago. And I knew a guy named Richard Fire, and I thought he and John would get along.
I was green with youth, relatively, my salad days. So I really wasn't interested in making something for everybody. And we were just very fortunate. I mean, this was really the first film that we had made, and we were given the money and just told to come up with a product that had some blood in it. So we really took this as an opportunity to stretch the envelope, if you will, and to make something unusual.
Richard Fire did indeed take it into a finer direction through his influence. I think we were a great team in that, because I had sort of the exploitation horror genre done. He came out of, more fine arts background, and I think that it worked very well between us.
And I was used, because I guess of my theater background, you should pardon the phrase, the Aristotelian unities of time, space, and action were kind of important to me. So I wanted us to have that integrity that adhering to that kind of unity gives you. And it was not important to me to explain why these people behaved like they did, but rather to just show them, almost in a documentary fashion, doing what they do.
You kill that high school boy, they're gonna slap your ass right back in jail, Otis. That's a promise. I mean, people have seen you together.
I'd still like to kill him, though.
I bet you would.
Henry Lee Lucas, this serial killer who had confessed to, I don't know, hundreds of unsolved murders in Texas. And I don't know if you know what his modus operandi was. If you had an unsolved murder in Texas, and you were willing to supply him with a TV and take him out of, I'm not sure if he left his institution where he was, or you would come and visit him, but you would bring him a couple of things, and then he would confess to your murder. I felt like I understood him. I felt like I could pretend to be him and relate to him. At the conclusion of it, even though I've used the word documentary style, it was not our intent to make a documentary, after all. The game was, imagine yourself as this killer who has no super ego check on himself and how he might act. You can't talk down to the character. I mean, you have to you have to find something in the character that humanizes him for you, that makes him a human being. So it was kind of important also not to judge. And the more realistically we could present the film and not rely on the boo kind of horror theatrics that certainly work and certainly have done, and I still go to those kind of films and I'm amused by them, but I didn't feel like that wasn't our opportunity.
Shit, I got to have a TV.
Well, let's go shopping.
When Richard and I were working on the script, we had done a fair amount of research, as much as could be done at that time, and there was a famous victim of, supposedly of Henry Lee Lucas and Otis Elwood Toole, and it was a body that was found naked save for a pair of, I believe it was orange socks. And we were trying to think of an opening shot, an opening scene, and Richard and I were watching that video, and all of a sudden that photograph came up, and Richard went, "That's it. That's the opening of our film." And we would restage that, which we did. And so I think from that we decided to do a series of tableaux because this was a man whose vocation was murder. I mean, and there was it was almost as if they were his like pieces. They were a little tableau that this is what he created. This was what came from his deepest soul. I don't know if soul is the word, but as a painter would paint, Henry would murder. And it was at that point we didn't want to see, the act. We just wanted to see the results. It wasn't that we believed that he actually did all these murders, because there was a great deal of question, and now it's probably that he did very few of them. The idea that was more interesting, that it was believable that he could have. We had completed the screenplay. We were starting to see actors for the lead roles at Richard's apartment, and we needed to get a check from Waleed so we could start the production. I went to Waleed and said, here's the screenplay, and I'll call you in a few days when you've had a chance to read it. And then, if you approve it, then we're going to need a check. We need to start. So I waited about a week, and then I called Waleed, or I don't know if I called him or went out there. And his words were pretty close to these words. I said, "So Waleed, have you read it? I mean, we really need to get going." He says, "No, John, I haven't had time. I really haven't read it." But he said, "I'm sure it's fine. Come on in and I'll write you a check for the first $25,000. And it was like, I didn't know that was unusual at the time, because never having made a film before. So we got the first installment on the $100,000, and I started the casting process.
I was working with the Organic Theater Company, of which Richard Fire was a member, and Richard and John had somehow tied up and came up with this project, and they asked me to come in and audition, and it was all downhill after that.
Where'd you tell Leroy you were going?
I don't want to talk about him.
Okay, we don't have to talk about him. You hungry?
Yeah.
Good, I'm hungry too. You think Leroy's hungry?
Tommy and I both, again, had worked with the Organic Theater. Richard and Tommy and I all worked together. Tom Tolles was one of my loves, and one of the funniest guys I've ever met, and so I was very used to working with and around him.
You a card.
Yeah, I'm the queen.
Yeah, queen of clubs.
Don't make me sorry I came here, Otis.
All the Organic Theater actors, they were all known for, like, whatever you told them to do, they'd try it. Jump off the balcony with a rope, and they'd do it. They're all like the bigger personalities that Chicago had ever really had.
We're seeing various actors for Henry, and we'd actually found an actor that we liked, It was like, it was beneath him because he was a man of the theater. We had a makeup guy working with us named Jeff Siegel who said, you know, are you guys interested in seeing, because I know a person who I'd worked with in a theatrical production. And this guy is originally from Alabama, and he's very raw, but he's really good. And would you be interested in seeing him? And I said, sure.
And he was already involved. So he said, you know what, I'm doing this little, you know, slasher TNA thing. And, you know, they haven't found the guy yet. So you should probably go and do a little interview, audition.
We were at Richard's apartment, and this guy was coming to see us. There was a knock at the door, and I went and opened the door. Richard and I would interview at this table. And it was Michael.
Hi.
And I just looked at him, my jaw dropped, and I go, and I swear this is true, I said a little prayer to myself, oh, please, God, may he be able to act. Because physically, this guy is perfect.
Fair enough. Well, I gotta get going. I got some work to do today.
I came straight from work to the audition interview. And so I didn't have time to change, so I just came right to the restaurant, white socks and all. And that's what I wore for work. And I think they were impressed. I think that got me the role.
I ain't interrupting nothing, am I? Part of the entire process was literally weeks of research before we actually started shooting. Watching every piece of film that John and Richard had collected, every article that they had accumulated. Then your natural sense of theatrical license takes over. Oh, we can go there. You know, oh yeah, we can do that.
Fucking pervert.
Back then, not a lot of the material was, it was all written in the third person, you know, a doctor or a specialist of some sort, talking about this kind of person, right? It really didn't do much for me. The only thing that really helped, that I got a little bit of ideas from, was a documentary. It was one of the interviews when once he had been arrested by the Texas Rangers. That was about it. Then I just used, let my imagination go.
No, easy.
What if you call the police?
No. It's not a good idea, no.
Interestingly enough, I knew a lot about Henry Lee Lucas and about Becky and the whole story because I was actually from the hometown he was tried in Georgetown, Texas, as a matter of fact. And so I felt almost like I knew her in some respects. I believe actually when they met, she was maybe 14. She was with him for 15 years or something like that. It's never clear if Becky, in real life, if Becky actually did know what was going on. I personally think she couldn't possibly have not known eventually. So as Becky, I had to see him as this knight in shining armor.
Don't do that, Otis. She's your sister.
Okay, I was only kidding around, Henry.
Tell her you're sorry.
He wanted everyone to go home and sort of write down our thoughts and our own bios and whatever and stuff like that on the character. Sort of things that I'd done in school. And I wasn't very up for it. I tape recorded my bio while I was in the can one day, just for the hell of it. And at the end of the tape recording, I don't know where it is now, I flush and leave. But, you know, it was sort of like a kind of a, yeah, here's my bio, enjoy it. And we actually ended up using a lot of that.
What was your daddy like?
My daddy? He used to drive a truck before he got his legs cut off.
Coincidentally, the scene where Henry tells Becky that he's killed his mother, that they're playing hearts or something, I believe came pretty much straight from our two bios.
Did you really kill your mama?
I guess I did.
How'd it happen?
I stabbed her.
I particularly liked the scene where Henry is talking about the abuse that his mother inflicted on him.
She beat me when I wouldn't watch it. And sometimes she beat me and make me wear a dress.
How do you pull the rug out from that scene? And so having him forget what he said he killed her a different way, and then, oh yeah, I happen to think that worked very well and really set the scene for subsequent things that happened.
She hit me with a whiskey bottle. And I shot her. I shot her dead.
Well, riding to the set with Michael Rooker, who was so into character all the time, and we'd be riding around talking, very conversational, and he'd say, oh, I'm thinking about going out to California, and my sister has a ranch there, and we had been talking for 15 minutes. I realized partway into this conversation, he's being his character.
My sister owns a ranch outside San Bernardino. She raises horses there.
He's talking about things Henry's going to do. He'd do this to me all the time. It got to be a joke. Like, okay, who are you right now? Are you Michael or are you Henry? I'm thinking, I'm talking to Michael. No, I'm talking to Henry.
The most important thing is to keep moving. That way they might never catch up to you. I'm gonna have to pack up and be on the move too pretty soon. But I still, you know, I was excited to do this piece because I wanted to see how I could, if I was going to be okay in film. I found it much more difficult to go in and out and hang out and chat with people.
His wife was pregnant, Margot, and I know it was very rough on her because he was, you know, in character and wasn't that pleasant to be around.
You know, they left me alone, so. You know, I just had my own little room. John set up my room, and I would just go to my room and hang out while they were doing lights and talking and chatting and having coffee and waiting for everything to be right. You know, I didn't want to be around. I wanted to keep my own kind of private space, and it was very difficult.
I gotta go out and get some cigarettes. Get some air.
Henry.
I'll be right back, I promise. I just need some air.
But it was very interesting. At one point I said, Michael, I mean, you know, it's often we have character models. We know somebody who's kind of like the actors will have somebody they know that's sort of like the character they're playing. And he goes, I said, do you have any? He goes, oh yeah, I had an uncle that was just like this guy.
You telling me you never killed anybody before?
I ain't saying that.
Then you've killed before, right?
Well, maybe I didn't have no choice.
Henry has a view of the world and how things should be and how he should act when those things don't obtain. Otis was along for the ride. And again, to call Otis happy-go-lucky is to demean the term happy-go-lucky.
He is a really reprehensible character, and I think he has to be that way for the film to work, because in a strange way, Henry is the hero. You know, and how do you make essentially a serial killer mass murderer heroic? And that's because he has this really, really gross sidekick who does seemingly more heinous things than he does. What did happen, I had a dentist friend of mine construct some teeth for Otis. And it's like Olivier says, you find the one prop, the piece of costume that moves you to the next level with the character. And as soon as you put him in, it's just like, oh yeah, you know, oh yeah, he's there.
How about getting your poor old brother a beer?
And Tommy Tolles, if you watch his character a few times and get over the shock, I mean, he's playing a buffoon and in doing it, you know, quite well. And I think there's much in the dialogue that is very humorous. I used to call it the poetics of idiocy.
What they call a modus operandi. That's Latin. Bet you didn't know any Latin, did you?
Big fucking deal.
What?
But those of us who actually made the film found it hilarious. I mean, it's the dialogue.
How much you want for it?
It's worth $1,000. I'd take half.
$500?
Yeah, half of $1,000 is $500.
Not a lot of people notice the humor, but Yeah, I tried to get John to turn it into a musical, but yeah, he wasn't up for that deal. There's only one left. There was a scene between me and Tommy that, thank goodness, never made it into the movie. Otis and Henry got together in prison as friends, and then it blossomed into something else, apparently. And there was one scene where Henry and Otis like give each other a big hug, a manly hug, you know, that kind of thing. I don't think it made it into the movie because, you know, I don't think it was very good.
There was another rape of Becky, I guess near the beginning of the story, where she has her own home invasion. This guy, I can't remember who he was or what he was, but I guess he ripped off her nightgown and had at it.
Henry and Otis are coming back from killing somebody or doing whatever, and Richard, it was Richard's, I think the scene was Richard, to show that the world has gone so crazy that even the murderers aren't safe. So they yank him off and they beat the shit out of him, and then they take him over and throw him out the window, you know. And it was when we saw the scene, it was hilarious, and it was just too silly, so we cut it out. And then there's one other piece that when they're on Lower Wacker Drive and the Good Samaritan pulls over when they have their hood up, and of course they shoot him mercilessly, and Otis goes over and puts the gun in the guy's hand, who's been shot in the head and the chest twice. And he looks up at Henry and he goes, "Suicide," just like that. And it was hilarious, and especially the way Tommy did it. And when we saw it in the film, it was, again, it crossed the line into, it was just too silly, and it took you out of the seriousness of the picture.
You know, Henry was a movie where we had no idea what we were doing. So if he had come to my house and said I had $2 million, it wouldn't have been any more or less scary than saying I had $100,000. I think that it offered enough money for us to do something.
The goal for each of us was to do the best we could with what we had. We had a very, very small budget, and we had to devise ways to accomplish the project in the most believable way we could think of with the money we had.
You know, we didn't have permits. We shot on the streets of Chicago. You know, it was freezing. It was October. And, you know, we were just having so much fun, and we believed so much in the project.
I mean, it didn't matter how small a job you did, you got something. Even I got money. I got a couple $100 for working on the music, if I remember correctly. That was my entire paycheck for the 18, 20 months of working on that crazy thing.
I'd be at the film festival office in the daytime. I was sort of their in-house designer, and I'd excuse myself to go run and put money in my meter, and I'd jump in my car, and I'd drive to these different locations and give them the props, set it up, look, see what it looked like, and then I'd run back, go back to work. Nobody knew I was doing this movie.
You know, John's not a big talker, and that's the way I enjoy my directors. Quite an artist. You know, he was a good director, first-time director. I was, you know, impressed.
John was a very, very generous director. He must have trusted us as performers, actors, very much, because for a director to allow his actors to literally, he would sometimes stand behind the camera and just say, "Okay, go."
He didn't ever tell me specifics. He didn't want me to do, he didn't say, "Oh, I want you to do this now," you know. Some directors get really specific. He would just let it go, man. He'd just give me an idea, and I, you know, we jived quite well.
The thing about John throughout all of it was he had a vision that was absolutely crystal clear. And when you work with something as fragile as an independent film. If you don't have that, it can very easily fall apart. I mean, he had a single-minded focus that drew it together and put it in exactly the frame and format that he wanted every step of the way. And that's an amazing gift.
The violence seems real, and actually it doesn't go as far as the violence you see now. And that's what makes it powerful, because it seems real.
The film is commenting on violence as entertainment. This was sort of in the era of the Stallone pictures where he would kill everybody, and and the idea being is typically in cinema you set up a character to be distasteful, to be hateful, and then the hero is allowed to kill him, to dispatch the character, and it's very gratifying to an audience because they had it coming. They deserved it.
What's the matter? You got shit in your ears? The black and white is $50. Take it or leave it.
Sorry we wasted your time. Come on, Otis.
Don't give me story, you dumbass.
Ray Atherton, who played the dealer in stolen merchandise, was very rude and abusive and insulting to our two heroes, if you will. And the audience, of course, knows these two guys are murderers, just murdering bastards. And so when he starts smarting off and wising off and insulting them, they're going like, the emotionally, it's like, ooh, these are the wrong guys, buddy.
Get out! I'll give you...
So by the time that these guys finally pick up the soldering iron, stab him, and smash the TV, it's played for fun, it's played for laughs, and it's played for, this is how you usually perceive, violent mayhem and in the movies. We've set this guy up so that you feel he deserves it, and when these guys let go and just slaughter him, there's a gratification.
Otis, plug it in.
Then that's compared with the later scene of the slaughter of the innocent family, and it's like, now here's probably more what it's like in real life. How gratifying is this, Do you find this entertaining? Do you find this, does this make you feel good in any way? I mean, this is what violence is like in the real world.
Bring her in. Bring her in, Otis. I ended up doing the camera work because we had all the mirrors. So I had the video camera and I shot the scene, and we, the kid comes in, we do, have the camera roll around, the DP grab it and put it down on a sandbag, and so that it could see us chase after the kid, bring him, drag him back in.
And a couple of times we had to stop shooting because, those are physically overwhelming events. And as controlled as you think you are, and completely controlled, no one was hurt, the intensity of the emotion that's put into it, that sense of focus, is just terrifying.
It was difficult for the actress. She and her husband had moved to Chicago from Kansas.
They may have told me everything, but I was so overwhelmed. It was the first movie I'd ever auditioned for or been considered for or anything, and first set I'd ever been on. So I think I wasn't clear. I was a little old girl from Kansas, I was like, oh.
And all the actresses that came, it was like, you have to understand, read this carefully. I mean, it was scripted, pretty clearly what it would be. When
I got there, they were pumped, and I was trying to have to match their energy and get into their same frame of mind. And when he brought me in, the husband's already there with the pillowcase, it's bloody. Oh my God, it was just, you really can get the horror of this, what these people did.
It was the emotional intensity. I think that comes across on film. It's just being truly, deeply terrifying and horrifying. And, you're proud of certain aspects of that as an actor, and then just sort of shocked that you've put someone through this. It's only a movie.
So wild. I was like, oh, freaked out, totally freaked out.
Look.
They thought they had hurt my neck. Tom thought he felt a rotation after we were done, because he had to jerk my neck each time, and I don't think it ever hurt. I don't remember anything, but Tom was pretty worried that he had done something to me, and so they took me to the emergency room
But I think it was much trauma as physical, you know, damage.
And you know what it's like when you're young and naive and you're afraid to say, well, you know, like disagree or... So I was just kind of having to deal. And then they even talked about necrophilia, which that really freaked me out. So here I was going to have to not only play dead, but then, you know, continue playing dead while various things might be done to me. Thankfully, John nixed that.
Let's go.
But you then find out they're watching it on TV after it's occurred. And you only find that at the end of the next scene.
And it's shot in such a way that you are watching this as entertainment along with these two fiends. How do you feel about this? It's sort of implicating the filmmakers and the audience at that key moment. And you are then put in the position of being morally culpable as they for watching murder as a form of entertainment.
What are you doing? I want to see it again.
For some ungodly reason, we had saved like 5 of the hardest scenes for the last day of shooting. And I have to say, I was extremely nervous that day. I had to shoot that horrific final rape scene. No! And the Otis's death scene. My reaction to Otis's death scene. And that was the one day that I really shaken out of my skin. I did happen to pass out a couple of times. Well, I had never passed out before in my life. I didn't know that I had passed out because I didn't know from passing out. And the way I was being held in the whole attack scene, I was hyperventilating, and apparently you're not supposed to do this when you're hyperventilating. And I went, whoom, I was down. And I came to and went, oh my God, I think I missed my cue. I'm so sorry, I missed my cue. And they're like, call 911. I'm like, no, really, I'm okay. And it was horrifying.
I love you, Henry.
I guess I love you too.
Oh, and the ending was sort of shocking too, that poor Becky, you know, and all her hopes and dreams. You kind of, because of Hollywood films, you keep, you know, you believe in the genre and you believe that there's going to be some resolution or there's going to be some redemption at the end, and it just rips the carpet out from under the audience, I think.
It was very important that he not be caught and punished at the end. So this was not going to be a, you know, a chase between the police and the criminal.
It's the only resolution that could be. Otherwise, it would be just like any of the other, you know, bullshit Hollywood slasher movies, you know.
The idea, like in The Thing, at the end, you know, they have the broadcast, he's still out there, he's coming to America. I mean, it's more horrific to leave it that way, that he's coming to your town, you know.
First time I saw the film, it was like, I had to shut it off. You know, it was seeing it without any sound, just the sync sounds that were all that were there. It was like watching a snuff film because it was so realistic. I had to shut it off, but then I thought, wow, that's kind of like what triggered the whole idea of where to go with it. Well, it was the thing that John requested. He had the piano melody, and he said, I wanted a little more discord. And he didn't want it really scored like, you know, most horror films.
I think that's why we kind of stepped outside the box a little bit musically and just experimented with things that weren't natural.
I said to Ken and Bob at one point, you two guys go off and sample some stuff that we can use in the track, thinking they'd come back with, you know, 3 or 4 choice lines. They sampled every damn thing they could find. Women screaming and guns, I mean, everything, which made the difference as far as the track went. We're running backward samples, we're running samples at slow speeds, So all of a sudden it all turned into, well, how about we paint the picture of what happened before we got to this scene.
And that's where we put in victims' screams, but they'd be twisted and kind of buried into the drone. You really weren't sure what you were hearing, but you knew it was an unpleasantness.
That's right. With that lovely die, bitch, die being
Die,
bitch. Die. If you listen to the track when they drive up to the home invasion, before they do it, it's just this whirlwind, this black cloud of these samples running in every different kind of direction and dragging up all of this horror. It's sort of my favorite track in the whole movie.
And we actually kind of built them together in the studio when we went to a place called Zone, which was a Christian-run organization. They were having a deal. We got it on their bargain basement prices. Oh God, I think we paid like, what was it? $35 an hour. But when the engineer saw what we were doing, he was to say the least, he was quite shocked to see. I don't know if he went home and prayed that evening, but at least for us.
The last thing he said as I left with the finished project was, next time you have to bring me a legitimate project.
And I think our first cut was like 2 hours and something, because it was our first film, and every frame is precious to you.
It was very long. I felt like we sort of fell in love with some of the scenes, and we were trying very hard to hang on to them.
The only way we had to show it was to actually take in the 60mm flatbeds, there's a little screen that you watch on, and it flickers. And so we took the video camera that was actually used from the film. We used that video camera to shoot the playback off the flatbed, and we used the mic on the camera and put the speaker by it to get the soundtrack. And that camera was a black and white camera, so we made a very flickery black and white transfer, and we showed that to Waleed and Malik. And it was dreadful to behold.
It's black and white. Of course it's black and white. What do you expect for 50 bucks? Fucking 3D, for Christ's sake?
There's not enough blood. There's not enough gore. I wasn't shocked to hear them say that.
So from that point on, I sort of think they were very disappointed in the film, and at this point, who can blame them? I mean, what they had to look at was dreadful.
We just went through the film and just said, this can go, this can go, this can go. The end movie is 83 minutes, so we did chop quite a bit out.
They weren't going to come off their original impression, even though it was a very different film. So it kind of got put on the shelf at that point.
John McNaughton came into my office and said, here's a film I did. So I looked at it and it said, Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, and I said, well, I like that kind of stuff. But I put it in and I just said, what was that? That was incredible.
And Chuck Perello, who was the director of Henry II, was working for those guys, for MPI, doing their PR.
The film was already, I don't know how many years old by the time I started saying, why don't you guys do something with this?
And I would call Chuck and say, Chuck, get me another dozen, order another dozen cassettes and send one here and send one there and send one here and send one there. And Chuck would continue to keep sending these cassettes out under the auspices of MPI.
I got a program into a small little film festival where it wasn't going to cost MPI anything.
And it started to go out in that way, and then I think the first big break it really got was the Chicago Film Festival. And Rick Cogan, who writes for the Chicago Tribune, got behind it and wrote a very nice piece in the Sunday Tribune section about the film and the difficulties. And that sort of got the ball rolling.
And this little movie didn't show a lot of it in reality, but what it did show was quite a kick in the gut, you know.
I just went in, I saw it, and I thought, oh my God. Whew. That is really horrifying and well done. And I haven't watched it since.
I was really impressed with the reaction that the home invasion scene had on audiences. It was too strong for them. I never thought that was going to happen.
People who had to leave would leave almost as if it had been scripted.
And it was shown at Telluride and caused a huge sensation. But the first screening, literally 20% of the audience ran out the door when the home invasion scene came on. Just, there was like a stampede for the door.
And then at the end of the movie, the lights came up and someone up there said, oh, the filmmakers are here. And we were kind of like all going like this.
We enjoyed that aspect, that our movie was raw enough that people would have a really visceral kind of guttural experience, you know, and just fucking get up and leave.
So there was a second screening, and only one person ran out.
I was late for the screening. I was running up the stairs to get to the theater.
And we looked, and you could see this woman jump out of her seat and come running up the aisle, and she's heading for the door.
She was running out of the theater quite rapidly down the stairs. I was running up, right? And we ran right into each other like this, like this. And she looked at me and she just started, she had this look on her face and she just screamed, ah, you know, she turned and ran right back up into the theater.
Well, I had a sort of a knockdown, drag-out brawl at the Locarno Film Festival with an audience that was half hostile and half supportive. I had sort of a argument with a fellow who stood up and said, I felt terrible at the end of that movie. And I said, well, that's sort of the point. You're not supposed to feel good about this. And I said, what did you think of the Schwarzenegger movie where they machine gunned these 360 people? It was one of those science fiction films. And he said, well, that's entertainment. I said, well, then there's something wrong with you.
And then it was shown again in New York. Elliot Stein, who was a critic for the Village Voice, happened to be there. And he loved the picture and wrote a full-page piece saying this is the best picture of the year.
My legitimacy as an actor, as far as my family was concerned, skyrocketed when Siskel and Ebert reviewed it, and gave it a good review. I thought, yeah, see? I am really doing this, Mom.
But I also felt like, boy, anyone who sees this movie is not going to let a stranger in their apartment, especially a woman. She's not going to get in a car. And in truth, over the years, I've met so many people who have said that they would never do any of those things again after they had seen that movie.
The MPAA screened the film, and at that point, they were going to give it an X rating. You had a choice. You could refuse the X and let it out unrated, but it was equivalent of being X-rated. You would not get played in majority of theaters.
I actually was the person who took the X rating certificate that was issued by the MPAA and wrote them a nasty letter and sent it back, just like, take it and shove it, will you, And just give us something we can use, will you?
Now, it's interesting because the MPAA is not officially a censor. There is no official censorship. And what they basically are is a trade organization set up by the motion picture studios to self-police. So they cannot say, cut this scene, cut these 8 frames, make these, they cannot give you specific cuts to make because then there will be censoring, then you can sue them. So I've often said it's the equivalent to getting into the boxing ring blindfolded because and they will say, well, we have problems with this scene, and this scene. And you go, well, what should I do? Well, I go, well, we can't tell you what to do, but we have problems with these scenes. And then if you'd like to resubmit, if you'd like to make some cuts and resubmit it, then we'll look at it. In the case of Henry, they said it was the overall moral tone that there were no cuts that would get this picture in our rating.
If you didn't like it, or if you thought, where is the moral compass? Why aren't you explaining why Henry is what he is? Well, I didn't want to. That's exactly what I didn't want to do. Everybody else does that.
They said you'd have to shoot the whole film over again. So, I mean, it's a rough film, but it's not pornographic. There just needed to be that distinction. So they came up with this NC-17 business, which is the exact same thing as an X rating, only it's a different moniker attached to it.
And I'm sort of thankful for that, because had there been cuts asked for, the cuts would have been made. So what the picture as it was released was the director's cut.
I said to both John and Elena at the time, this is going to be the most artistically pure project we ever do. We did not have to compromise on Henry. I think that's part of what made it what it is.
I was very, very fortunate to be able to do it, and to have met and worked with everybody that I did. That's basically what you want your career based around, good work.
I wouldn't have changed the budget. I wouldn't have changed where we shot it. I wouldn't have changed any integral part of it.
I think I was fortunate enough to land a role that really moved me in a way that got my creative juices flowing.
It just is a very truthful picture, I feel, that by removing that buffer of fantasy that normally is prevalent in horror films, it's tremendously uncomfortable and memorable. And it just kind of goes through your sort of buffering mechanism and straight into your psyche in a sort of uncomfortable and uncompromising way.